I just want to mention that this session is being recorded for the ASE website, and they have a YouTube channel, so this will be posted on the YouTube channel. And I would like to thank all our participants, as well as a special thanks to our presenters for today's session. We have with us today Ying, Zhen, and Yunsun. Sorry. I knew I was going to be nervous about this. So in terms of the outlay for today's session, I'd like to just give you guys a brief update. We will have both our presenters go first, and then I will do a brief introduction of both. Then it will be followed up by a Q&A session if we have any questions. And if you have questions, please either do the raise your hand function on Zoom, or put it in the chat, or ask the question. I may have to leave early, so my wonderful brother-in-law is actually going to help me out today and be the moderator for the Q&A session. So you can also type your questions directly to him through, and his name is Michael Clifton, and he's in the chat box. So without further ado, I just want to thank both our presenters today, and I will now introduce Ying Zhen, who is an associate professor of business and economics at Wesleyan College. Or sorry, where are you? You're Wesleyan, right? Is that correct? Okay, just making sure. And
Wesleyan,
okay. And her major fields of specialization are in labor economics, cultural economics, and industrial organization, with special or specific research interests including economics of immigration and the music business. She's also a member of the Music Industry Research Association, and had the honor to work with Professor Alan B. Kruger of Princeton University on the survey of well-being of musicians in the United States from December 2017 to June 2018. She's also was invited by a senior editor of Routledge to currently write a book with two co-authors on a tentatively titled Markets and Artists in Music, with a focus on the United States and the political economy of music during the COVID-19 era. So thank you again for joining us. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Dr. Ying Zhen.
Thank you, Iris. And good afternoon, everyone. This is Ying. I'm Associate Professor of Business and Economics at Wesleyan College. And today my presentation is Gender and Racial Discrimination in the US Music Industry. Thanks again for introducing my bio. So from my bio, you might have learned some background information about today's presentation. So it was my honor to work with Dr. Alan Kruger at Princeton University on this collaborative survey. So our survey was about the well-being of musicians in the United States. So he was the founder of Music Industry Research Association, Mira. So he founded this organization back in August 2017, and I was a member. Therefore, my honor to work with him on this survey from December 2017 to June 2018. So it's more than half a year, and we exchanged about 324 emails, and I was totally impressed by his hardworking spirit. I got emails from him at 3:24 a.m. On this project, because we designed the survey together. So he, me, and the vice director of Princeton University Survey Research Center. So we three designed the survey, and we also received great assistance from a research assistant, James Reeves, from Princeton University. And Music Cares helped us recruit most of the musicians in our sample. So we conducted a survey of 1,227 musicians in the US from April to June 2000. 2018. And this survey actually covered more than today's presentation. So we surveyed musicians' career opportunities and challenges, experience with gender and race discrimination and sexual harassment, mental health, substance abuse, physical health, and health insurance coverage. And where possible, results are compared to a national sample of musicians and to the US general population of adults. Yeah. So Alan Kruger is a very big name in economic circles, so I'm sure most of you have read his paper, right? So here you can find more details of him, yeah, from this slide. And yeah, very sadly, in March 2019, he passed away. So so I feel very sad, very sorry for the loss. Yeah, and from the articles, from the mass media, from the news articles, so I learned that his pass away is from a suicide. So personally, I'm not quite sure about the reason of his death, but this is what I have learned from the media. Yeah, so I'm very sorry about that. And therefore, it's my honor to continue our research, and especially I've been invited by the senior editor at Routledge. So me and my two great co-authors are working on a book on music industry. So part of our book would be based on our collaborative project. So this is our way to remember him. Yeah, such a great economist. Okay, so here you can find some information about our survey, 2018 Mira musician survey. So again, we surveyed 1,227 musicians and composers, conducted from April the 12th to June the 2nd, 2018. Yeah, we recruited so mostly clients of music cares and others who are part of a list of music industry personnel maintained by the American List Council. Respondents were also asked to refer other musicians, and we also interviewed them. Yeah, the goal of the survey was to identify and interview a representative group of individuals who earned a living as a musician or music composer, or who were endeavoring to earn a living through making music. Therefore, those amateurs or hobby players like me, right? I consider myself as a fake musician, so we are not qualified for this survey. And one of the big limitations of our sample is that it's non-random, and you can see the distribution. 62% of the sample is from music cares, and 30% from American List Council, and 8% from the referrals. Many questions are taken from national surveys, so they can be compared to general public, and also the questionnaire, I think, is still available online, because after Alan Kruger passed away, Mira, I don't think it still exists, but there are some organizations who showed some interest of continuing this organization, but as far as I know, Mira no longer exists. So that's why our book hopefully can can continue its research. Okay, so therefore we compare our musicians to the American Community Survey, which is a national survey, and here you can find the detailed comparison between our sample and the American Community Sample musicians, ACS. Yeah. So we can see that our respondents tend to earn a higher income, from the end of the table, and they tend to be more highly educated. We can also easily find the percentages, and also they are slightly older than the national sample. Yeah, so here we can find the age information. So our sample is slightly older, but more highly educated than ACS musicians. And if we look at the gender distribution, right? So we can see that female musicians are underrepresented in the music industry. And according to our tabulations of our sample, right? So it's around 35%, yeah, which is very comparable to the ACS sample. So basically, female musicians only accounted for about 1/3 of musicians in the US. Okay, so this may suggest, right, some evidence of gender discrimination, just very initial evidence. And also today my presentation, my article is at its very initial stage, so you may find it's not very academic yet. So so basically it's pretty descriptive, although I do have some empirical analysis. Okay, so here is the quick tour of findings in our report. So as I said just now, right, our report covers several aspects, likes and dislikes of being a musician, career activities, discrimination and sexual harassment, mental health, and drug and alcohol use. Okay, and we asked survey respondents to indicate all of the genres that they have performed in the past year from a list of 25 different genres. I think this is a French word. I think we have different pronunciations, maybe genres or genres, right? Yeah, so here you can find the top 10 genres performed not last year, so back in 2017. So I'm sorry about that. So I haven't updated because our survey was conducted in 2018. So last year was 2017. And the questionnaire also asked musicians to report their primary instruments. And here you can also find their percentages. The most popular, guitar, and then keyboard, piano, just come after guitar. Okay, and the survey asked the musicians to indicate what they liked most about being a musician and what they liked least about being a musician, and they could select multiple items from the list. And table 3 summarizes their responses. So we can clearly see that the musicians highlighted the opportunity for artistic expression, performing and collaborating with others as the most preferred aspects of being a musician. And on the negative side, financial insecurity and time spent marketing themselves stood out as the least preferred aspects of being a musician. A general similar pattern was found for men and women, and for whites and non-whites. Yeah, and unfortunately, throughout the entire report, the only positive thing in our report is from panel A. Yeah, so the artistic expression, performing and collaborating with others are the most preferred aspects of being a musician. So they are so this is the only positive thing in our entire report. Yeah. Okay. And table 1 presents the sources and shares of income resources for musicians. Yeah, because this would prepare for the possible evidence of gender and racial discrimination, since their labor market performance is definitely very, very important. Yeah, so we can see that musicians often earn income from non-music related activities. So just playing music is far from enough. Yeah, and the Mira musician survey found that the average musician earns 2/3 of their annual income from music-related activities and 1/3 from non-music related resources. And this table reports 17 possible sources of music-related income. And by far, the most common source of income is performing live events. And in our book, yes, the world has changed, right, since March 2020 due to the pandemic. So performing live events may not be the most important anymore. So we are adding several chapters on how COVID-19 would affect those musicians, and hopefully we are able to include their well-being post COVID-19. Yeah, so this has become one of the focuses in our book. But based on the survey, 81% of musicians earned income from live events in 2017, and these performances accounted for 42% of the average musician's music-related income. And you can also, from the table, the second and third most common sources of music-related income in 2017 were giving music lessons, 42%, and performing in a church choir or other religious services, 38%. Yeah, so if you look at them separately, right, you can find their respective percentages. Therefore, together with the live performances, these three activities accounted for more than 2/3, around 70% of the average musician's music-related income. Yeah, so this, so far I'm presenting the outline, the big picture of US musicians we have surveyed. And we also found evidence on gender and racial discrimination. So here you can see some preliminary results. Yeah, so in the survey, we have questions such as, have you ever felt that you were discriminated against by a client or customer because of your gender? And there is an analogous question regarding race. And the same questions were included in national survey of self-employed workers, which seems like a reasonable comparison, since a large number of musicians work as independent contractors. So here from this table, you can see that in both cases, musicians are substantially more likely than the general population to report that they have felt that they were discriminated against. Fully 71.8% of female musicians said that they have felt discriminated against, substantially greater than the 27.8% figure for the sample of US self-employed workers. And female musicians are even more likely than the general population of women to report that they have been a victim of sexual harassment, 67.1% versus 42%. And statistical test indicates that this difference is highly unlikely to be the result of sampling variability. And we also found that non-white musicians are also substantially more likely than non-white self-employed workers to report that they have felt discriminated against because of their race. So 63.3% versus only 36%. Okay. So in addition to the possible evidence of gender and racial discrimination from such self-reported data, it is necessary to explore empirically whether there would be evidence that gender and racial discrimination might play a role in affecting musicians' income, especially music-related income. And if so, how big their impacts are. Yeah, so here, table 5 and table 6 summarize the income sufficiency regards. Yeah, so table 5 shows whether total income would be sufficient to meet their living expenses, and table 6 presents whether music-related income was sufficient to meet their living expenses. Yeah. Okay. So the data reveal that the surprising fact that 61% of musicians, so we may look at table 6, 61.1% of musicians said that their music-related income is not sufficient to meet their living expenses. Such a share among male musicians is lower than that of female musicians, 58.4% versus 66.3% respectively. However, such a share among white musicians is significantly lower than that of non-white musicians, so 57% versus 75.5% respectively. So yeah, so here I apologize, the last column is not very clear. So Y stands for yes, and then here is N. N stands for no. Yeah, so N stands for no, so which means that they don't think their income is sufficient to meet their living expenses. Yeah. So just now I especially presented data from the last row, so which means they don't think their music related income is sufficient to meet their living expenses. Well, table 5, right, when asked about their total income, including non-music related income, 36% of musicians said that their total income was insufficient to meet their living expenses. And such a share among male musicians is slightly lower than that of female musicians, so 35% versus 38%. So we didn't see a huge difference. Interestingly, such a share among white musicians is significantly lower than that of non-white musicians, so 32% versus 50% respectively. And half of non-whites. Okay, yeah, so I think I have already covered, yeah. Okay, so that's all for this slide. And because we might be curious, yeah, maybe their music related income differential is due to their different amount of time spent on music, right? Therefore, this table presents the time allocation between music and non-music work. And you can see musicians in total, male musicians, female musicians, white musicians, and non-white musicians. So although the list of music activities in this table is not exhaustive, it's consistent with our earlier results about the time allocation. Yeah, so here we can see that musicians on average spend more than half as much time earning income from non-music related work. So here's like 7.85, right, which is about half of 14.13. So yeah, so they on average spend more than half as much time earning income from non-music related work as they do from performances. However, the gender racial differential in hours spent on music related and non-music work hours are not significant. Yeah, so you could easily tell from those data. which supports the continual exploration on the possible effect of gender and racial discrimination's impacts on musicians' income. Yeah, therefore, the key research questions so far in this study are summarized as below. So from the first point, right, so we can see this study just summarizes and analyzes the gender and racial discrimination that musicians may face in the music labor market of the US. So we are just, looking for the initial evidence, and then with a focus of exploring the gender and ethnicity interactions effects on the economic return of musicians, and the interaction results between gender and ethnicity or race in both general and specific forms on music related earnings are specifically explored to find out, to further explore the possible effects of gender and racial discrimination on the economic return to the musicians' music-related activities. So so far the empirical questions are, the empirical equations are very simple. You can see the main equations are based on the basic Mincer human capital equation, and then it has been expanded to include gender and racial information. So the second equation, right, you can see, right? So I just added, so this is a continuous part of our collaborative work. So I just added this augmented earnings equation to explore the interaction effects between gender and race on musicians' income. And alternatively, the more specific regression model is as below to further examine the interaction effects between gender and ethnicity. So like Black, Asian, Hispanic, and their interaction with the female dummy variable. Yeah, so far very initial empirical analysis. And here we can see the results. Yeah, so this table presents estimates of music-related earnings equations with various forms, with a focus on finding out if there is further evidence of gender and racial discrimination in terms of economic returns to musicians. So in general, they suggest that educational attainment and being married contribute to musicians' music-related earnings, which is quite interesting, especially marriage. And from columns 1 to 3, all else being equal, 1 more year of education is associated with 3.6 to 6% of increase in music-related earnings. Those who are married are making around 28% higher music-related income than those who are not married, ceteris paribus. However, gender, race, ethnicities, and labor market experience do not significantly affect musicians' music-related earnings. In other words, although the self-reported data suggests that musicians are suffering from both gender and racial discrimination, no initial evidence has been found that they would have a negative impact on their music-related earnings. The interaction effects between gender and ethnicity in both general and specific forms on music-related earnings are explored to further explore the evidence of gender racial discrimination on the economic return to musicians' music-related activities. The results from column 4 indicates that the music-related earnings differential between white female musicians and Hispanic female musicians is as high as 132.1%. Yeah, so just do some math from the regression results. Although only the coefficient for the interaction dummy variable, which is female and Hispanic, is significant. All the other coefficients of gender dummy, ethnicity dummies, interaction dummies in column 4 are insignificant. Therefore, the evidence of racial discrimination on the economic return is not strong at all. And we performed the VIF test, the variance inflation factor test, and the multicollinearity is not a problem. Yeah, so this test has ensured that. Okay, so in conclusion, right, so here we can see, right, this is a survey based on 227 musicians in the US in 2018. And the descriptive analysis suggests that musicians in the US may suffer from both gender and racial discrimination. However, no initial empirical evidence has been found that they would have a negative impact on musicians' music-related earnings. And also the interaction effects between gender and ethnicity in both general and specific forms on music-related earnings are explored. And the evidence of racial discrimination on the economic return is not strong. And in future years, yeah, because Mira no longer exists, but we still hope to expand and refine our sampling methods. So in our book, we designed a follow-up survey, so with my co-workers, which focuses on some cultural economics questions. So we hope to better define musicians, and also there are more questions designed to explore their well-being. And also there are many questions on COVID-19. How has the pandemic affected their earnings, their performances of music? Yeah, so this is also, I mean, they are also part of our future research, but based on our survey, right? So our sample is not random. Yeah, therefore this is a difficult task. It wasn't possible to recruit a large random sample of musicians or one with known probability weights in proportion to their representation in population. Therefore, our results so far should be viewed as providing an approximation at best of the population of musicians, but there are lots of alarming results. Yeah, so if you look at the entire report, such as suicidal rate, and also drug abuse rate among musicians are very, very high, much higher than the general population. Yeah, so here you can find yeah, those specific next steps. Draw attention to disturbing findings to improve conditions for musicians, and ask respondents permission to follow up. So we'll create longitudinal data. So after I mean, several rounds of negotiations, so we are glad that Princeton University Survey Research Center is willing to help us with the second round of survey. So basically, we'll combine the follow-up survey with the original survey, and they even hired graduate assistants to help us with the survey. So we are very, very grateful. And also George Mason University Law School is willing to assist us with the intellectual property rights part. So we are also very grateful for that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty much everything. Yeah, so I just talked about our follow-up survey, so which is the third point. Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for your time, and thanks to Iris for organizing today's seminar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And again, we will have time for follow-up Q&A questions after our next presenter. So again, thank you so much for presenting for us. I thought that was very fascinating. Next up, I will introduce our second presenter, and making sure that she has the ability to share her slides. So next up we have Dr. Yunsun Hu. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm so nervous today. Who is an associate professor of economics at the University of Wisconsin Whitewater. She's also affiliated with Women's and Gender Studies at UW Whitewater and is a visiting scholar in the Department of Labor Studies and Employment Relations at Rutgers University during the current academic year. She's a feminist economist whose research focuses on the intersection of economics of gender, labor, and migration. Recent publications include Corporate Board Gender Diversity and Ethnic Ownership of U.S. Banks, Family Typology and Gender Empowerment, the Labor Market Performance of Married Immigrants, and Gender Empowerment and Educational Attainment of U.S. Immigrants and their home country counterparts. So without further ado, thank you so much, Dr. He, for joining us today, and I will turn this over to you.
Hello, hi. Thank you so much for addressing and introducing me and my work. And actually, I'm guilty because I make Irish practice my last name so hard. That makes, actually makes confuse more. So my name is Yunsun, and then I'm talking about today some interesting group of migrants in South Korea. So let's start. Basically, motivation. So let's start that my title, Bridal Immigrants in South Korea, and I'm gonna focusing educational selectivity and their decision to work in the paid labor market. So motivation is coming from two facts. First, immigrants are a self-selected group rather than a randomly selected sample. It's not just like normal people that who is in stay in one place. There are some motivation to move, and then there are reason to move, right? Well, also another big factors, traditional gender norms grant men and women different rights and obligation. Well, because of this, women's decisions are restricted by not only the economic resource, but also gender status, women's empowerment in their society and the families, right? So what does that mean? Well, if female migrants that is not only influenced by economic resources as a reason, but also there could be some gender norms influence on their decision-making of self-selection. Well, the one interesting factors I found recently, a different type of marriage has appeared in South Korea with significant demographic changes. Well, what type of marriage it is? Well, Korean men typically it started from, let me give you background. It started from probably around 1990s, where as fast development, economic development in South Korea, and also, of course, gender empowerment of women and education level of women increases. As it increases, what happened is in countryside, male farmers have difficult time to find their spouses within country. So what happened is these farmers start to get married from the woman from other country, typically poor country, somebody from Southeast Asia or some former Soviet Union area. But so those women from developing country actually married to South Korean men, typically old. So after 40s and 50s, you couldn't find out your wife in Korea. They start to go to other country and get those wives. Well, interesting part here is when you're looking at these immigrant wives, they are not typical family migrants, who already married with their husband. And then typically when you're looking at migrants, we are looking at labor migrants. So who follows their spouse because their spouse is primary movers, and then they have new jobs, and then those family follow up. That is we typically called family migration. This is kind of migration based on family, but this immigrant woman, they married based on commercially arranged marriage. So I call it bridal immigrants, where you could think about concept of, or the concept of mail order bride. It started around 19th century. You know, if you think about it exists around Western Europe and US even. Typically retired old men, they actually orders their brides from less developed country through brochures, somebody who listed their name as a bride, and then, you know, those old US male, typically 60s, you know, if you are retired, and then they actually have those married. Well, those type of marriage wasn't that much popular since some point. However, well, recently in East Asia, this similar type of marriage occurs. So they called mail order brides as a woman who lists herself in catalogs and is selected by a man for marriage. And I called as a bridal immigrant, given that I want to use the term, which is more respectful to women. And, you know, as a saying, instead of mail order brides, I can avoid the term of commodifications of woman, also avoid the de-evaluating woman's value. This immigrants is not simply, you know, purchasing and sales. They also decided to migrate, and there would be the reason behind, right? So this is a background. Well, what about recent Korean bridal immigrants? They are typically meet their spouse through the international marriage agency, right? Well, typically male pay around $20,000, and then they flew to, for example, those East Asian country or China, and they go there and have a meeting with multiple women. And then if they prefer certain woman, they have date a couple of times, and then they get married. So it's somewhat different from traditional marriage based on the romantic relations, and then develop their relations to be a family, right? So what happened in South Korea? Recent demographic changes in South Korea say about 3% of the total population are foreigner. Well, South Korea is one of the most homogeneous ethnicity in the world. So, for example, in 1995, only 0.5% is number of foreigners. Well, now it looks like small if you think about 3%, but if you're looking at changes from 0.5% to 3%, that is a lot of changing. Well, international marriage explain more than 10% of total marriages in 2010, which is more than 85% of marriage immigrants are women. So what happened? There is big population changes, demographic changes, and then Korean government start to pay attention, because historically it's very, very culturally and ethnicity is also very homogeneous country. Well, you know, if you're looking at raw number, in 1990, it was 50,000 foreigners in South Korea, and in 2013, it became 1.5 million. If you think about raw number of immigration, well, more than 30 times increases between 1990 to 2010. Can you see that? So it's significant change. Well, as we have more foreigner, well, Koreans are not that familiar with the different culture, you know, foreigners in the country, and Korean government as well. They start to make a policy. For example, policy on restoring international marriage, Korean government policy in 2010, they enhanced the visa processes for marriage immigrants. Well, there, of course, because this sudden change of, brighter immigrants will create also many side effects as well. Well, women who cannot speak Korean just married in a week and then come here, they're not prepared. Then it could be more vulnerable to the domestic abuse and then many other problems. Also, now these women having a baby, now there is children from multicultural family, right? So because of that, in 2010, they enhanced visa process and they include certain requirement to be married immigrant reside in South Korea. For example, they request language education. Also, they put some restrictions on international marriage agency, introducing help program for international marriage. So that is what's going on in South Korea. It's kind of interesting and fascinating phenomena, given that this type of systematic immigrant wives actually exist, and then they even collect big research data survey. So if you think about before, most of research for the male-old bride is mostly case studies or narratives. But now, because of this Korean government's project that try to understand what is this population demographic changes, we could access large data set regarding this population. So I jumped in 2018 and finally I started working. Well, when you think about those immigrants, well, very natural question is about what type of people will come to the nation, right? Typical debate regarding selectivity of immigrants include two parts. One, positive selectivity. That means immigrants have more positive observable or unobservable characteristics which lead them to be more successful than their non-migrant counterparts. So who is moving, who is more motivated, work hard, and so as a result, for example, in the labor market, they earn more income than those non-migrants. Well, there's, of course, the opposite hypothesis. Opposite case, we can call the selectivity, that is a negative selectivity, that is immigrants who have less positive observable characteristics and unobservable characteristics, which lead them to be less successful than their non-migrant counterparts. In this case, negative selectivity means those who failed the success in their home country, they just, leave their country. So basically, exact opposite. Well, this gives me the question, well, then what type of woman decide to migrate as brighter immigrant to South Korea? Right? How are they different from their home country counterparts in terms of education? Why education? Of course, there would be unobservable characteristic, but as you see, it's hard to measure it. But if you think about education not only includes just human capital. To reach higher level of education, you are willing to go to that system and study further. So I was looking at that, this would be a great idea and chance to investigate what type of immigrants, women they are, when we are looking at brighter immigrants. Are they positively selected or negatively selected? Second question is, well, when you're looking at those immigrants who moved to South Korea through the marriage, but they also, many of them actually participate in the paid market. So in the labor market in South Korea. Well, then naturally I was thinking about, well, when they moved to the new family through the commercially arranged marriage through international marriage agencies, then what type of empowerment brighter immigrants would have in their new family, and how does it relate to their decision to participate in the labor market? Does the spouse's attitudes on gender roles matter, or their just the decision-making, their own decision-making powers matter? So I decided to investigate these questions. If I already briefly mentioned that, existing literature, if you think about before these many brighter immigrants in the East Asia country, typically feminist, anthropologists, and law studies, they are focused on brighter immigrants, mail order brides, so-called. And then there was not many quantitative analysis. Well, they typically link global capitalism linked to the patriarchal ideology or proposition, prostitution, and the labor substitute of those immigrants, or human trafficking issues. About the legal aspect, they're looking at the process of mail order bride industry, and then looking at what is potential illegal part, and then why it's, how can you analyze from the law perspective. When you're looking at immigrant studies, or this study, you could think about many categories of intermarriage. Sociology and demographies focus on inter-ethnic marriage related to Western mail order brides, and or dealing with marriage immigrants in East Asia. And initial time of the study more likely summarizing government statistics, and then looking at legal process of immigration for private immigrants in Taiwan, South Korea, and those type of studies. Where ethnic and racial studies also focus on this type of immigrants. Well, relatively few economic literature exists about this era. However, recently, since probably a few years, like 2 to 3 years, later, there are many actually studies focusing in brighter immigrants in Korea. Well, when you're looking at economic literature about the immigration studies, maybe you can think about some studies focusing on authoritative marriages. Typically when you talk about authoritative marriages, you talk about, similar educational level, people who had a similar educational level, they met together and then they married, such a thing. Well, or intermarriage and then economic assimilation, sometimes focus, typically looking at white and non-white intermarriage. Recently, Asian brighter immigrants focus on policy impact on host country condition and marriage decision of groom. So as Korean got this new phenomena occurred, it got lots of attention from scholars in many fields, not in economics, of course, sociology and demographies. And well, main focus started from how policy changes affect the cost of marriage immigration and their impact in their home country, or they're looking at the link to the change of gender status in host country and marriage decision of women and men in Korea or the other East Asia country. Basically, they're looking at sometimes what would happen in host country, for example, in South Korea, and when their marriage immigrants come in. Or some of them worried about looking at survey data of abuse, that brighter immigrants experience, something like that. Most recent one I found interesting is Lee and Wee in feminist economics. They're looking at citizenship of marriage immigrants in Korea and access to economic resource. There's typo twice, okay, economic resources. Well, again, when they're looking at these immigrants, they define foreign-born women from a developing country who married to Korea. So yes, there would be majority included, but there would be some people who just met through the personal interactions for their marriage, right? Well, also, for example, in 2020 study, they only looking at sample from Vietnam, so Vietnamese woman, foreign bride who has, F2 visa status. So either, few country, 1 or 2 country, or 1 country, Vietnamese, for example, because there are many population from there. Well, what I think as a contribution, if I develop this study further, and it would be first to study focusing on mainly selectivity and human capital of brighter immigrants themselves in South Korea. basically, I also identify bridal immigrants rather than dealing with all marriage immigrants altogether. So I find out really good recent data. I could identify who is the married woman who goes through migration through commercially arranged marriage. And it would be also first study for investigating bridal immigrants' gender empowerment within family and its impact on this season for the labor market participation. What is data source? Well, this individual immigrant data, I use government survey data, which include a survey from families and immigrants, spouse, immigrant themselves, and children. In South Korea, they call that as a multicultural family, and the multicultural family is defined as the family composed of married immigrant and Korean, or the family including non-native citizen who got citizenship later. So that survey is about 10% sample of multicultural family in South Korea, and it has detailed survey questions for all of those identity agencies, and total 17,849 household survey is completed, and between July 22nd to August 11th in 2015. So relatively new data. To identify bridal immigrants, I merged different surveys. Surveys from immigrant spouse and family, immigrant themselves, and children, and link spouse information. And I could restrict sample from that. Foreign woman married to Korean men who meet their husband through marriage agency and having either F6, which is marriage immigration visa status, or spouse of Korean visa status, or green card holder visa status. So there is survey questions. How did you meet your spouses? I focused on those who answered that I met my spouse through international marriage agencies. So there's no way that I can include somebody who just met, personally through the traditional marriage, right, for the romantic relationship starting. What about home country educational data set? My focus is I want to compare those immigrants' educational level and those their home country population educational level. I adopted Barrow and Lee World Educational Attainment data set from 2013 data set. Basically, it looks at population percentage of educational attainment in 7 categories by sex for the years 1995 and 2005. So data set include percentage of population in 7 educational level in 7 categories: no school, complete and non-complete, primary school, complete and non-complete, secondary school, complete and non-complete, higher education by sex and ages. So I looked at over age 15 and over age 25 at 5-year interval between. Basically, they collect data between 1960 to recent. Well, they measure the educational attainment in the world, so of 142 countries in a consistent manner across the time. Because across the country, because institutions are different, their educational measurement might be differently measured, but they use that consistent manner for the comparing those all educational system. So when you're looking at these 7 categories, you can compare their educational level to the other countries' educational level. Well, approaches are following 4 steps. First, I identified bridal immigrants. So first, analyze statistics of Korea bridal immigrants and identify majority countries of origins for bridal immigrants, not just 1 or 2 countries. I'm looking at how many and where they come from. And also I measured educational selectivity of brighter immigrants and construct new index using Leverson 1976, and that is called net difference index, where that is between immigrant population and home country population across the main 10 source countries. Well, why NDI, net difference index? Because this is developed, net difference index developed to actually make a unbiased comparison between small number of group of people with large group of people. So when I'm looking at those immigrants from those countries, which is relatively small population, and then compared to the country level population, I want to make sure that there is less bias for that. And NDI compare the difference and direction between two probability of inequality among two populations. So that's first I constructed. And second, I try to measure gender empowerment in the new family using their survey questions. Measure brighter immigrant woman's decision power within the new household, and then measure spouses' attitude on traditional gender roles. So how husband has some attitude towards that woman's role in the family. Well, regression analysis is the last one. After that, I analyzed the determinant of labor market participation for brighter immigrants, and including those constructed measures for gender empowerment within the new family. Here is outcome. Well, when you're looking at that, brighter immigrants in South Korea's statistic in my data, there is absolutely lots of number of Vietnamese, and then large number of Cambodians, Filipinos, people from China, and also Uzbekistan. And this is 10 main countries of origin. Well, if you're looking at a basic statistic, as you could see that mean age of brighter immigrants is 29, age of husband is 45. So you could see the big age gaps. Well, it started from the countryside farmers, but actually now it is more of urban single male who couldn't find out their spouse, or they divorced and then they give up to find out a Korean bride, then they go to this market. Well, the brighter immigrants' average years in my sample is 4.7 years. Age of migration is 24. So they actually come here very early, age of 24. Ranges of ages, age of husband is 24 to 80. And if you think about these differences from those brighter immigrants itself, that would be big. Year of migration is between 94 to 2015. Well, first marriage, 91% wives has the first marriage as this, and 75% of husband. Well, total number of observation in the sample in terms of brighter immigrants is 1,667. Number of brighter immigrants from 10 countries is 1,658, and then number of labor market participants is 735. Those outliers, have few number of observation. I dropped that because it's not enough data. So I only selected 10 main country of origins. Well, as you could say that their occupation are those immigrant wives who work in the labor market, mostly work in the unskilled work. If you're looking at that, professional job is only 2.8%. If you're looking at simple labor construction work is 44% almost. Manufacturer job, functional skill job, this is all simple skill job. Also, when you're looking at employment status, most are the full-time worker or self-employed. Well, so now let's see how I constructed those net difference index. Basically, net difference index of educational attainment for immigrants is calculated based on percentage of immigrants with more higher educational attainment than non-migrants, and the percentage share of immigrants with less educational attainment than non-migrants. Basically, I'm looking at probability differences. If we assume population X as an immigrant population and population Y as their home country population, then when I looking at this equation, it's simple. Basically, I subtracting the probability that educational level of a person in Y will exceed the educational level of a person in X. This is subtracting from the probability that educational level in a person in X will exceed the educational level of a person in Y. So what does that mean? The range of index value would be from +1 to -1, right? Because the maximum, the probability you can get is 1. So what does that mean? If NDXY is 1, that means all immigrants exceed all non-migrants in terms of educational attainment. So every immigrant has a higher education than home country population, then it would be 1. If it's opposite, it would be -1. Well, so for example, what if it's 0.5? How to interpret? Immigrants' educational attainment exceed that of non-migrants 50% more often than non-migrants. Educational attainment exceeds that of immigrants from that home country. Right? So I looked at each country's home country educational level, and then immigrants from that country, and I look at education level, make a 7 category, and then construct NDI. Amazingly, this is the outcome. If you're looking at that, about that, for example, Vietnam and Cambodia, actually all of brighter immigrants in South Korea, their NDI was positive. Well, because direction of selectivity is denoted as a sign of NDI, and the magnitude of NDI reflect the level of differences between two probability, right? So if it's more close to number 1, then more of magnitude of the difference level between the probability of between two populations, get which one has a higher educational level. So in this data, if you're looking at that, Kazakhstan and Laos and then Cambodia, those women from those countries has 0.7, and that means 70%. If you're looking at this, 70% more often the immigrants' educational attainment than exceed that of non-migrants. Well, what about the other country? For example, Mongolia and China, 0.3. That means instead of 70% more often, they are 30% more often. What does that mean? Actually, amazingly, all brighter immigrants, even though they select migration method as a marriage, through the commercially arranged marriage and then migrated, they are actually more educated than average population in their home country. Of course, magnitude of this might be different. In fact, I have studied for US migrants, it was in the feminist economics. I'm looking at those migrants in the US across 42 countries. I compare this educational selectivity. They are all highly positively showing the number of NDI. They were also labor migrants. So the number was all above, mostly 0.7, 0.8. So relative magnitude, although it's not the same country, between US and Korea, however, relatively smaller. When I looking at immigrant woman, even married immigrant woman, between US labor market versus here, because these immigrants are brighter immigrants. So anyhow, they are positively selected. Well, then what type of economic model for the labor market participation? Well, as you could see that I'm looking at a simple OAS regression model, include human capital characteristic, number of young children, household income, and years in the US. Where immigration study, typically when you are living longer in the host country, right, you could be more assimilated. So I looked at years in Korea and then years in Korea squared. And then also this is the, what is the number of young children could influence the labor market participation of married women differently. So I included those characteristics. And then I added additional variable, which is woman's empowerment within the family and husband's view on gender equality. Well, I'm going to explain how I construct this measurement, but I want to introduce how regression include additional variable. To measure women's empowerment on the decision making, I include 3 survey questions. Well, survey questions and scale of answers is the following. First, about spending. Who decide household spending? Well, opinion scales decide by myself. So immigrants said, I decide by myself, then it's number 1. Where in between, there's many I decide, it's number 2. Decide together with equal power. Number 3, mainly spouse decide, husband decide, or spouse decide alone. So that's extreme opposite. And how about child education? Who decides children's education decision? Again, this is 5 scale. The third one I include is who decided labor force participation or job. This is also 3 scale. 2 measures, women's empowerment measure, I make this calculation. So if you're looking at that, when the value is the least, so for example, it's 1, that means woman has highest decision-making power. So to make it easy to interpret the gender empowerment, I make this empowerment measure as 6 minus answer for the each category, and then make a equal weight, and then make a scale like this, where scale would be from 1 to 5, and then if it is 5, that means women decide themselves about all those decisions. Well, if the value becomes smaller, then basically mostly spouse decide. Same method I used for husband's view on gender equality. I adopted 3 questions, where the question to husband was like this: husband's wife's role should be different, such as breadwinner versus housework, where if they strongly agree, it's number 1, strongly disagree, number 5. So if they say strongly agree, that means very traditional gender norm they have. Male is breadwinner, woman are, houseworker. Well, second question, dual earning couples should have equal workload for the house chore. So another question about house chore, and equal child care, that has the same responsibility for the child care, right? So using this, try to make a same method. So if husband's attitude towards gender equality is more equalized, then it would have higher number. So this is the formula I use. Using this formula, this was outcome I measured. Women's empowerment on decision making within family, I just categorized based on their home country. Well, it seems like a woman from the Kyrgyzstan, they have a highest empowerment. A woman from Laos, relatively low, but this is the average value. Well, this is a typical regression result from the Beijing model when I don't include the woman's gender empowerment within the family and husband's attitude. Well, as you could see that This is simple logic regression. It wasn't OLS, it was logic. So I'm looking at odd value. If you're looking at as people live in Korea longer, they are more likely to participate in the labor market, where when they speak Korean fluently, they are more likely to participate in the labor market. Number of children under 5 actually reduce probability of a woman participate in the labor market, typical. And when I add labor force participation of bridal immigrants using the woman's empowerment in it and then spouse attitude, well, amazing is husband's attitude wasn't significant enough, but obviously woman's empowerment give a higher probability of labor force participation of bridal immigrants. So this means woman's empowerment within the family matter. And all other category of the variables show that typical sign, which is the same with the basic model. Results basically say positive selectivity for all bridal immigrants. They are more educated than their home country population on average. And Korean speaking, years in Korea, household income, woman's decision power in the family positively influence labor force participation of bridal immigrants. Well, negative effect of young children on labor market participation, and there were no educational effect on labor market participation of bridal immigrants. Well, this might be because also the maybe when you consider that occupation they typically work is more temporary and then unskilled level, there might be some reason, and no influence of spouse gender view on the labor force participation of bridal immigrants. On my suspicion, probably when you're looking at the husband, they are also selected group. They are not a random Korean male. So they probably have the similar gender view regarding how wife's role in the family. So maybe that's not that differences across those samples. Main conclusion I want to emphasize is bridal immigrants in Korea are self-selected group compared to average home country population. And most important factors for the labor market participation are experiences in Korea and their empowerment for decision-making within family. So maybe those positively selected individuals come to the new family. Of course, there would be some component of what would be determined this empowerment differently. There would be language barriers, across different groups, because the main bridal immigrant from China that is typically Korean Chinese, so they could speak some Korean already. So compared to that group versus somebody from Philippines or Vietnam, they don't have those language advantage. And there's cultural differences based on distance as well. Although we control the bus, there might be some other issues. And I'm happy to discuss and then develop a study further. And thank you so much. I wish that I didn't spend too much time. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing.
All right, well, thank you. Well, I appreciate that. That was very interesting. We'll start the Q&A session right now, and we'll start off with a question for Ying. Ying, do you think the impact of COVID-19 will affect music genres differently considering age demographics of listeners?
So personally, I believe so, yeah, because we haven't formally started writing this part yet, yeah. So because we need to wait for our data, but generally speaking, yeah, yes, and pandemic would definitely affect their performance opportunities for sure, yeah. But in terms of variations in gender and races, ethnicities, I think we have to wait for the data. Thank you.
And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, since it's very fresh in everybody's mind and activity. And I'll just lay this out for the rest of the audience. If you have a question, feel free to either include it in chat or to unmute and speak up. So I'll move on to one for Yunsun, just based off of the recent presentation. Do you think that there's going to be any increase in immigrants based off of positive experiences for those who have come over and entered the labor force and seen that empowerment? Do you think they would send back information and increase that commercialization by people wanting to join in?
Oh, so can I clear the question again? So your question is that if I'm thinking that amount of immigrants would be increases, can you repeat again? That I couldn't.
Yes, absolutely. So basically, I'm getting down to, it seems like there's a lot of empowerment of these women coming over into South Korea, which would likely lead to positive experiences and going back home. Do you think that would increase interest from other women in that country to enter the commercialization and come over?
Yes, actually it is occurring. And the reason, so initially it started from mainly, the main population started from the China, and because it's a very close country and targeting Korean Chinese who can speak Korean. But it expanded more of Southeast Asia, and the now main group is Vietnamese. Well, although it's possible through the internet use, they could also connect each other through the internet, but then we are unsure about who is, those mail order price category, basically only focus on who just, decided to move using the marriage as a method of migration. Where would it be increases? Actually, in the East Asia, not only South Korea, some countries like Taiwan, they also have Hong Kong. They also have this type of population. Some people, some feminist perspective would say that this is the result of those, patriarchal system, the ideology of patriarchal, those gender differences, plus the division of labor, international division of labor. If you're looking at this population, they basically, most of population who migrate from home country is those from the poor country, and they move to the rich country, developed country. So there is a division of labor, and some people even pointed out that is another exploitation under the capitalism, right? Because that is what's going on. And one things we can also looking at, well, there are biased view about this woman, either they are victim or, they are the sneaky woman who tried to get the citizenship from the developed country. That is very big extreme bias. But actually, this woman also have some motivation to move to other country to get better life. So they looking at mobility as their empowerment from that country. Now, if you're looking at those studies, those anthropologists study, they surveyed and then interviewed many of those women, and they see not only them, their families, and then those people in the villages looking at that mobility, international mobility itself is actually empowerment of women. So they face unexpected environment more likely because they don't have enough information. But that's also the, some interesting part here, those women sticking to their new life in the new country. So it is increasing, but at the same time, Korean government really start to restrict to prevent abuse of the, those commodification of women and things, where if their policy is ideal or what would be impacted, depending on when they start what type of policies, the magnitude of influx of those women in the country actually different. So it was most common up to 2010 and 15, a lot of women, but number of population who migrate is kind of decreasing, but at the same time, it's exposed to more through the friends and family conversation. So I think there's a chance to increase this. Yep.
Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to share a question for either one of our presenters?
While somebody texting, can I ask a question to Dr. Zhen? Because I really like that your research agenda. I think it's interesting. And one interesting part when I'm looking at that, there was a positive impact of marriage on the income of musicians, right? Well, when you, of course, you run the dummy variable to control gender, but when we're looking at in the labor market, typically marriage negatively influences on income of married women in the labor market. So my question is, have you tried the run the regression based on separate groups? So run the female musician only, and then run the male musician only, and see that if the impacts are consistent between two groups. Because depend on, you know, the statistic, it could be dominated by male musicians, given that only 35% are female musicians. So I think that might be, I don't know, you already do it, but that was my thinking.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, so we haven't done this yet. So that's a great suggestion. So may I repeat your point? So basically run two separate regressions. One is just on female, right? And the other is married people in general?
No. So yeah, so female and male. So
and
man and woman separate.
Okay.
So looking at the certain percentage of woman might be married and might not. So looking at how impact of marriage on their income is different, because typically I was expecting minus, but we combined the data, so it was positive, but we were not sure if it's the same for female only group. So I just, I thought that was good robustness check, or maybe you can use that as a main, your analysis, and then using combined data set as a robustness check. So, there would be, you can actually compare the coefficients between two groups, male musician and then female musician. That's what I felt.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
And let me know, it's interesting. Yeah.
Oh, sure. I'll keep you updated.
Is there any other questions?
So the chat is kind of quiet right now. I don't know if anybody else has any further questions here. We'll give a last call. Okay, I'm going to assume that the silence means that there's no further questions. But I want to thank everybody for your time. This was very, very interesting. Oh, hey, David spoke up. But thank you again, and we look forward to doing this again. Oh, sorry, Ying, you got your hand up?
No. This is like clapping my hand.
Ah, gotcha. Sorry, just caught my eye.
Thank you for your time. Thanks to Michael for continuing our webinar.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you guys here. I could see your name, and then thank you for listening presentation.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Have a good day and enjoy your weekend.
You too.
Bye, have a good day.